Welcome to Coffee with the Candidates, Round 2, The Road to the General. This second portion of the program will feature candidates vying for public offices in the Guam legislature, the Attorney General's seat, congressional delegate, and the top seats of Governor and Lieutenant Governor of Guam. Democratic senatorial hopeful Jack Hattig III and Republican senatorial candidate Julius Santos sit with us to discuss the issues in this episode of Coffee with the Candidates, Round 2.
Hafaday and welcome to Coffee with the Candidates. I'm Andrea Pellicani from Newstalk K57. Joining us today is Democrat candidate for Senator Jack Hattig III. Welcome.
Hafaday, Andrea.
I want to get to know you a little bit better. You're running for senator. We've had a couple chats here and there in the studio, and we've been watching you along the campaign trail. First of all, congratulations for making the cut and getting to the general election. Tell us a little bit about your background. Your background is something I'm not as familiar with.
And that's fine. I consider myself to be a regular citizen. I'm a father. I'm a husband. I'm a taxpayer, a citizen, soldier in the Guam Army National Guard. I taught for 13 years in the Guam Department of Education, and I was education NCO for the Guard for a couple of years. And I work for a small company now based out of Honolulu that is contracted with the Department of the Interior to assist the Guam Department of Education with federal monies for capital improvement projects. So like I said, I consider myself a working class citizen of Guam, and that's really my message, and that's really why I'm running. Is I believe that we need more representation in our legislature of the regular, average, I guess you can say average Jack citizen, and that's just me in a nutshell.
So with that position that you've held in your career, would you say that there are a lot of opportunities maybe that we could be taking advantage of to bring more revenue to the island? Or how could your knowledge in that field bring benefits to the Guam legislature?
Well, thank you. I was education NCO for the Guard for 2 years, and I helped manage millions of dollars in GI Bill benefits and also incentive monies for our soldiers. So I believe that my background there in managing money can help us create a better economy. That's one of the planks of my three-plank platform, was renewing our economy. And what we needed to do was we needed to maximize the two current sources of money we get as the U.S. federal government, obviously, and tourism. But we have to diversify that money, and we have to create new sources of revenue. I'm very interested in what solar, wind, and water have to offer, because now it's more accessible and it's not as expensive as it was. Technology is making it easier and more affordable for us to transcend into the new age using our abundant resources. So that's one. I definitely want to lock horns with that and work with my fellow senators in the 35th legislature, try and open that up. Telecommunications and satellite, making Guam the hub, that would be the second opportunity for revenue generation. We already have our ocean lines coming in, so let's tap into what the internet and what telecommunication has to offer for us.
We're a good strategic location. Some people will say strategic military, but also communications and travel. Right. We're definitely right in the middle of connecting two different sides of the world together, and so we could definitely find areas where we can create or make or take advantage of opportunities. You've been a longtime educator, and I know there was a case that was filed against you, a complaint that was filed, and you've spoken about it.
Yes.
I wanted to give you the opportunity to clear that for the record, so whatever may have been discussed, at least in when people are considering voting for you, right, what could you tell them to reassure them that you would be a good person to vote for?
Well, yes, I did come out with it before I declared my candidacy. I wanted the public to know that there was allegations against me. I maintained my innocence during that entire time. I went through the process. There was nothing found against me, and so there were never any charges filed against me. And I had the record expunged. I paid my own money, and I hired a lawyer. And when the Attorney General didn't find any evidence to prosecute, I tried to get on with my life. Of course, it was a big sacrifice that I had to leave. I left the department and tried to get a job, and I was in the National Guard, and that helped me. But I want to assure the people of Guam that although things happen to us, no matter what, we're here to overcome that adversity. That's the mark of a good person, is they're able to overcome a challenging part in their life. And I feel that I've learned a lot, and I'm ready to. I've moved on so much, and I'm ready to move into a different field and serve our island the best way I know how, using the education that I have and the tools that I've gathered. So that's what I would definitely say to the public.
You've been big on the economy. We've spoken about that before. And, but you also have extensive experience with the Department of Education. Right. What are some things that you could bring as far as creating new policy or refining policy that already exists that could improve the Department of Education or improve the education just in general for our children?
There's, the focus of the department through the years has always been about personnel. It's always been, and that's very important. I think that should still be a focus, but we can no longer afford to look past the physical conditions of our schools. Part of my job as an asset management coordinator is to go out to the schools and to actually survey lighting, plumbing, and air conditioning units to make sure that our kids are safe, to make sure their learning environments are adequate, especially to the law. So I think that's one thing we need to focus on, is let's put a little bit more money and emphasis into our facilities. We've already kind of connected the dots by making the property tax go towards Territorial Education Facilities Fund. We need to stop raiding that fund, and we need to use that money, what it was intended for, was to fix our schools. A number of our schools need wholesale renovation. They need to be updated. Not in the case of Simon Sanchez. Simon Sanchez needs to be completely rebuilt. The structural integrity of the school has come into question many times. It should have been condemned as JFK was. So I intend to work with the Board of Education and the superintendent to make those connections and to give priority now to the facilities. Some of the ways we can do that, obviously, is curbing our dependence on certain personnel needs or, in my opinion, wants. For instance, maintenance can be outsourced. Instead of having a central maintenance division, our maintenance people work hard, they do, but our government is in a situation where we don't have the cash and the revenue that we used to have, and we have to use it wisely. So let's outsource some of our AC units, our maintenance, let's outsource all of that and save some money. So that's what I want to work with the board with.
Education, public safety, and public health, the three pillars of what government should be responsible for. We hear this just about every election. How can we better translate that into action when we consider who we want to vote for? Mm-hmm. How can we hold people like you running for election, making campaign promises, more accountable to the things that you promised during the campaigns?
Well, a lot of it has to do with communication. And I don't blame anybody for mistrusting the government, the legislature, the governor, the judiciary, anybody. We have not, and I say we because I intend to be a senator in the 35th legislature. We cannot assume that people are going to come to us with their problems. We've got to come out there and we've got to find out. And it's through that interaction, that's where the accountability occurs. Transparency and accountability go hand in hand. We've seen so many times where our government has not provided us with the information or provided us with very little or skewed information. It's the dawn of a new time where the citizens are now looking for legislators, for representatives that are going to communicate with them. So that's one thing I bring to the table is I would like to communicate that. And one of the first bills I wanted to introduce is a reporting bill requiring the legislature, members of the legislature, to go out into the public and physically report on what's been going on, what bills they're passing, and more importantly, to solicit ideas for the next step in what we should be doing and ask questions. That's the accountability that we need in government.
I think engagement is a big deal, and I think we've come a long way this past legislature and moving forward with a whole slate of new young candidates just like yourself. How can you respond, and this is going to be my last question for you, how could you respond to those who say, we don't know these new candidates? Where can we find you? How can we engage with you?
I understand that depending on the type of, I tend to think of myself as not a top tier candidate. A top tier candidate is like a person who already has a network, a person who already has the infrastructure built in, a person that may be connected via business or maybe through a relative. That's going to be very difficult, obviously, for new candidates that have no political experience like myself. I'm trying my best to be proactive, but you can also reach out when you see me on Facebook or when you see me in the community, and I'm making my rounds now. I'm going out and I'm making an effort to be a little bit more proactive and get out there. Engage with us. Don't be afraid just because you don't know who we are. We made it to the top 15 of the primary, so now our names are everywhere. Our faces are going to be everywhere. Stop us. I'll have time to talk with you. I'll have time to listen, more importantly, to you. But it's just as much, I know a lot of people say, well, it's not my responsibility to get to know candidates. It's their responsibility to get to know me. Well, think about it in terms of, well, we might not have, there's 15 of us in the Democratic side, and 15, we might not have the time to reach everybody. So an informed citizen would also have the opportunity to seek out a candidate that they might support.
Yes or no? Do you think a supermajority for the Democrats is possible this year?
I do. I feel very, very good about the slate of candidates we have. We're dynamic, we're energetic, and I think we're going to do well in November.
Thank you so much. Jack Hattig III. We are going to be right back right after this. Thank you so much. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Coffee with the Candidates. I'm Andrea Pellicani from News Talk K57. I want to thank Jack Hattig for joining us earlier, but I'd also like to welcome with us today Julius Santos, Republican candidate for the 35th Guam Legislature. Welcome, Julius. It's been a while. Thank you for joining us here in the studio. You're running as a Republican. Mm-hmm. Is it a difficult time to be a Republican right now?
No.
No? Feeling not
It's an interesting question.
It's an interesting question.
I guess I can understand where it's coming from.
It's just looking at the numbers and looking at some of the data and trying to get a feel of what people are feeling. We have now talks about potentially, candidate replacements, looking at the results of the primary election. Right. Do you feel that making it past the general is going to be a bit of a challenge?
I felt this entire thing has been a challenge, and yes, making it past the general will be. Looking at the numbers, as you say, at the primaries, and of course there's a huge disparity between the two parties. However, in the general, individuals can cross over when they're voting, and so when you talk about the difficulties of being in one party or the other, that's what I appreciate about the general election, is the voter can now treat everything as an individual, right? It allows them, it gives them that freedom to truly choose the individual that they feel will best suit the job.
Right, the general tends to be more issue-based, and that's definitely something that potential senators can definitely run on. Tell us about what issues are important to you.
What issues are important to me, considering everything that I've experienced working in the government. How do you say which is not? We look at the hospital and the challenges they're facing. We look at education and what's going on there. And looking at all of those, because I'm not an expert in those fields, and I never claimed to be, instead I thought to myself, how can I help those areas best, right? Whether it be directly or indirectly. And of course, that's by strengthening the economy, because everything needs funding at the end of the day. And so that's where I decided to take that path. And my goal has always been to diversify industry in Guam, to broaden and widen the tax base, if you will.
What areas or sectors are you looking at, do you think we could tap into as far as potential to grow revenues for the island?
Of course, we'll always need outside investment to add more revenue to the existing pool here in Guam. That's just a fact, a reality. However, my emphasis, my focus is on local entrepreneurs, the homegrown entrepreneurs. I want to be able to empower them and facilitate the opportunities that will help them reach their goal, their vision, their dream of establishing their business in Guam. Our local entrepreneurs are the true job creators. You know what I mean? They take all the risk. They take their life savings and invest it in a business that they believe in, and they work hard to accomplish that. And the more successful they get, the more people they can employ, and the more revenue ultimately the government can take from to pay for the things that it needs to, i.e. the hospital.
I think one of the good examples that we can see as far as success goes, initially Chamorro Village was supposed to be an incubator of sorts. You've been at GITA, you're familiar with all of this, and you've seen some businesses start out there, spend their time there, become successful, and then go out and branch out on their own. What could we do to expand or improve upon what we're currently doing to encourage more of that?
I'm glad you said what could we do, because there are many people with many different ideas on how we can make it work, you know, and I'm glad that you mentioned, you brought up the fact it's an incubator. We've seen businesses there. The first one would probably be Jamaican Grill. Of course, that was an anchor business there. And what do we mean by anchor? It's a business that attracts customers to come to the Chamorro Village, and the hope is, the idea is that when the customer comes to the Chamorro Village to maybe go eat at Jamaican Grill, when they're done eating, maybe they want to walk through, and then that gives the opportunity for the other business there to attract customers. So when I look at it, and whether people like it or not, we would discuss ideas at GITA, and I say, well, why don't we bring stores or businesses that are already attractive and kind of inject them, like, oh, what if we went to like Crowns and said, hey, would you like to have a spot here, because we know that you attract customers on a regular basis. Maybe we get a beauty salon, because we know whether it be men or women who want to get their hair styled or get their eyebrows, whatever it is, there's consistent traffic coming to these businesses. And you know, I spoke to some of the vendors there who had their businesses, and there was a little bit of pushback and say, well, they're going to take customers or whatever. And so I try to explain why, what my vision is and what the strategy is there. I'm not claiming that it is the only way to do it, or it is the right way to do it, but I see a potential for the Chamorro Village to grow in that sense, to provide more customers for the existing entrepreneurs who are there, who are taking advantage of the incubator system.
It's an interesting idea, and this is the first I'm hearing of it, because typically outside of the Wednesday night market, it's difficult to generate, you know,
regular
traffic, foot traffic and stuff.
Oh, can I just kind of qualify that statement? One of the biggest complaints was that, and it just comes from various sectors, even customers, I go there, the store's closed, and we don't really know the hours, and there's a lot of frustration there, and I'm not trying to blame anybody. I'm trying to look for a solution that can maximize the benefit for all who are involved, for both the customers and the vendors who are there. I didn't mean to interrupt you. So.
Oh no, absolutely. I'm glad. I'm glad somebody's looking into that, because I think we can definitely improve that as opposed to just focusing on certain areas.
Correct.
Like we do have a lot of resources that we expend in Tumon to continue to promote tourism and but to expand that out past and the. You know, building up our capital city is always a good thing. Tell us about some of the other issues that might be important to you.
Well, it's interesting. I was having this conversation last night about an individual who's going to go travel, and of course the cost of airline fees traveling from Guam to Hawaii came up. And so I told him, I said, well, I have this idea, and I'm kind of talking to an individual who's from Guam, who left a while ago and started developing this really small airline company. And he was asking me, what is the potential to invest in Guam? And that's where this idea was born, like, how can we create competition for United? Because that's really how we get prices to drop. And so I'm looking into it now, and I'm hoping that I can find good answers to it. It's what if we had local investors? Again, whenever I talk about an idea, I don't want the government to pay for it, right? I would like to get local investors, and if we need to, get outside investors to come and invest in these plans. Purchase a plane locally. It'll be a Guam-owned plane, so it's a US-owned company. And we partner with Asian airlines. So we're not trying to provide a service like we're going to fly here or fly there to that destination. The planes that this local investment would purchase would serve the purpose of partnering with Asian airlines, so we can now offer them direct flights to Honolulu, because the Jones Act with the cabotage applies the same thing. They can't go from US airport to US airport. For example, Philippine Air would fly to Guam, they'd have to fly back, and then fly to Honolulu. And I looked at the prices from Philippines to Honolulu, it's like $800, whereas for us it's like what, $1,200, $1,500 on a regular basis. So how do we address that issue in a productive way? It's going to cost money, it'll be an investment, but if we can find local investors who are interested, again, you purchase a plane, partner with the Asian airlines, have them now be able to allow their customers there to have direct flights with one stop in Guam. And again, my hope is that we can create competition for United and bring those prices down.
You bring up the Jones Act, and I think that's really important because I don't know if we as a community just have a full of understanding of how this could be a roadblock to lowering the cost of goods or airlines or whatever it may be. How can we work within the parameters of the Jones Act to continue competition in the marketplace to lower the cost of living and lower the cost of rent and just basic things that we need?
Right. So let me explain the Jones Act in the way that I understand it. Some people might say that's not how it is at all, but in a simple nutshell, again, a ship from China carrying goods comes to Guam. It cannot go to another US port, so it cannot go from Guam to Hawaii. And so if it's coming to Guam and then it has to go back to China, go back to Hawaii, the owner of the shipping company, it's going to cost that person, time is money, right? And especially it's traveling by boat. And we're also not an export, we don't really have a strong export industry. So when the ship is going back to China, it's not full. Again, that's revenue that the shipping company is losing. So he has to charge more for the shipping, which means the distributors have to pay more for that. So they have to kind of raise their prices at the retail store so that they can kind of keep everything going. Right? It's not necessarily a nefarious kind of thing going on. It's just the reality of cost, right? So the Jones Act, it's because of the Jones Act that the ships can't go from Guam to Hawaii. It would benefit the owner of the shipping company more if he could go straight from Guam to Hawaii, maximize his time and his profit. I hate to use that word because people hear profit and they automatically think bad, but in order for a business to operate, they have to profit. So what I found out recently is that the Guam and the other U.S. territories are exempt to a certain degree. All we need is a U.S. flagship. That means we need it to be U.S. owned and U.S. operated. The Jones Act goes a little bit further, saying it needs to be U.S. steel made. You got to buy it from a U.S. company. So Guam is actually exempted from those other requirements, if you will. So we could technically purchase a foreign ship and do the same thing, kind of partner with other shipping companies and bringing those prices down. Because again, and when I say United is the only airline that can come in, I'm not saying they're bad people. It's just by federal law, they're allowed. And so by federal law, Matson has a stronghold in that industry. So how do we create competition? How do we lower shipping prices? And this is how we do it.
I think you raise a few good points. I think the key to lowering the cost of goods is always competition.
Correct.
You're sounding awfully Republican, but
I mean, okay, if that's a Republican thing,
I think
fine.
that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But what could we do to encourage, just in a nutshell, a better competition amongst the businesses, not just the small businesses?
Right.
There's a lot of competition in small business, but maybe some of what we consider to be medium to large businesses on island. Just
Right.
real quick.
So yeah, on island terms, we have small, medium, and large. In international terms, every business in Guam is a small business. I know it's hard to wrap our minds around that, right? This is where GITA comes in, and it plays a really critical role, and it's gotten beaten up in the past over its qualifying certificate, and people are saying, don't say that, it's bad, the QC, don't say that. And I think it's because, again, people don't really understand what's happening there. My grandfather, his colleagues, our grandparents, they had, after the war, there was nothing here, and they had to come up with this vision, how do we get people to invest here? So they came up with tax incentives. And the problem with that is people think we're giving the money away when that's revenue that didn't exist before. So they actually have to invest hundreds of millions of dollars first, and then they receive the benefit in the end. So really, Guam truly benefits from that. So we create tax incentives to stimulate competition, to empower our local entrepreneurs first. I understand it, we need it for the foreign investment, but we need to create tax incentives for our local entrepreneurs. We need to streamline the process for them to get their business licenses and for them to get their permits. Again, I'm not faulting anyone, but we seriously need to look at the problem and figure out how to fix it. And the more minds that come in with the notion of we only want to solve the problem, we don't care whose fault it is. Right?
Thank you so much. Tax incentives always sound like a really good idea. Thank you for joining us in the studio today. Thank you also to Jack Hattig for joining us earlier. I'm Andrea Pellicani from News Talk K57. I hope to see you on the next episode of Coffee with a Candidate.